So, aloha everybody. My name is Avalon Paradea, and so today I'm going to be giving a talk story on a collection here at the Mookini Library, Hawaiian Collection, which is Specimens of Hawaiian Kapa. And so, first of all, does anyone not know what Kappa is that's in the room? Okay, so everybody has an idea of what Kappa is, but just for the sake of prosperity, or posterity, not prosperity, I'll go ahead and give a brief overview of what Kappa is. So, Kappa is Hawaiian barkcloth. It's referred to by a lot of different names throughout the Pacific. Tapa is a really common word that you'll see used for Kappa, even in Hawaiian literature a lot of the time. Tapa is the Tahitian word for barkcloth, so it does have place-specific names. So Kappa is specifically Hawaiian barkcloth, but traditionally Kappa was used for literally anything you can imagine you would want fabric for, so clothing, baby's first blanket, there's kappa moi, which are sleeping kappa, so blankets, and then also as death shrouds as well. So it was a really important material and a big part of Kanaka Maoli life, and it's something that a lot of people act like it's gone extinct. That term is actually used in this book, which is really unfortunate. Kappa's not extinct, but it got very close to being extinct. Some of the last recordings of Kappa being made prior to more recent times, there's some anecdotal references of a gentleman making Kappa in the 1920s. I don't know more details than that, unfortunately, but for the most part, according to Samuel Kamakau, the very well-known Hawaiian historian, most Kappa had stopped being made by like the 1850s, and especially by the end of the 19th century. European textiles came in, of course, with the arrival of Europeans, and these really quickly replaced the need to be making kappa. So what kappa is, though, is it's a material made out of the bast, which is the inner fiber. Some people say the inner bark. I like to say inner fiber just because when people think bark, they're thinking like the rough outside of a tree. But it's the inner bast, it's the phloem, to be really specific, from the wauke tree. And so wauke is also known as paper mulberry. These are canoe plants that were brought over specifically to make kappa. So they're not, they're not endemic species or anything. They're prolific growers in wet habitats. Unfortunately, I don't think there's nearly as many wauke patches now as there would have been in the past. According to most literature, they were usually planted alongside ko, so sugarcane. And I think that's because they like kind of similar habitats. They like sort of wet habitats. And I believe they might have actually been planted around kalo, lo'i kalo as well. So this would have been a really common plant that you would have seen in like habitation areas all across the Hawaiian Islands once upon a time. And now you're only going to find them in some remnant patches or also in areas where people are purposefully growing them. So like at my kumu's farm in Waimea, she purposefully grows 2 different varieties of wauke. There were several different varieties that were Hawaiian varieties specifically. One of these is Pua'aha. Another one is Wauke Nui. And then there's another variety that I'm familiar with called Manalima, and that variety is not considered like a traditional Hawaiian variety. This would have been brought in from other parts of Southeast Asia later on. And so what happens is, I wish that I had a tree to show you guys, but when growing a wauke tree, you're trying to keep the lateral branches from growing. So you're constantly just taking those little buds, you're popping them off before they get big. You want the tree to be perfectly straight because you want just this long piece of material that you can get your fiber from. And what happens is we scrape off that outer ili, that outer bark. We strip off that inner bark or inner bast, and then you take that material and you soak it in salt water for a couple of days to maybe a week, and then same thing in fresh water as well. And what that does is it's a process called retting, so it breaks down those fibers. I once referred to it as fermentation. Somebody was like, no, it's not fermentation. Like, it's totally its own thing. But there are bacteria in the water, that are breaking things down. So it's, some people say it's smelly. I love it, but I'm kind of weird. So it is very strong smelling, though. There have been some moments where I was like, okay, that's like on another level right there. But once you take it out, it's softer than it would have been if you were beating it fresh. And so once those fibers are kind of broken down, what happens is you're able to beat it with a hohola, which is this smooth, rounded kappa beater. And these are made from a variety of different woods. I think mine's is ohia. And sorry, it's kind of dirty. I probably should have given it a good wash, but I've been busy with it lately. And that initial beating helps to kind of spread those fibers out, soften them. And then from there, when you're ready to make kappa, kappa itself is not just a single piece of bast. It's two or more pieces that are laid on top of each other. And those pieces are felted together using ie kuku. So the ie kuku, unlike the hohoa, is, it's got this square shape to it, and you can carve all sorts of different geometrical patterns. Kakao vai, these are the watermarks that are left on kappa, and this is part of why Hawaiian kappa is especially beloved, because it's got these incredible, geometric patterns that are literally imprinted into it. It's like a tattoo, basically. So yeah, that's a little overview of kappa, and the cool thing about this material is that you can constantly change it and transform it. You can beat it once, and that first beating is mo'o before it's kappa. You can dry that for 100 years if you want to, come back to it, re-wet it, lay it on top of another piece, beat it into kappa, and so it's a really incredible material to work with because it's really forgiving in a lot of ways, but it also totally has a mind of its own, in my experience. Like, I might want something that just doesn't turn out the way I want, and at this point in my life, I'm like, that's great, that's cool, like, we can have that conversation, If it wants to do its own thing, I'm not going to tell it what to do, basically. So, sorry, I realized I probably should have brought my notes out. But, yeah, so there is a mo'olelo also relating to kappa. The name differs depending on the source, but Maikoha or Mikoha is supposed to be the man that was the first wauke tree. And in most of the stories that I read, he does something heva. He does something like wrong and inappropriate. What that is exactly, I don't honestly know, but he basically knows that he's going to die. And so he talks to his two daughters, Lauhuki and La'ahana, and he tells them, I'm going to die. I need you to bury me in this location. From that area, a tree is going to sprout. And from that tree, you can clothe yourselves, you can create bedding and all these other things. And so his daughter, Lauhuki, is the first woman to actually beat kappa, and then his daughter, La'ahana, is the first woman to decorate kappa. So these are like patron deities of kappa making. Hina is probably the most famous, though, because Hina is known for her kappa making. That's the whole purpose why Maui captures the sun, is so that she can dry her kappa, which the sun's moving too fast and her kappa's just staying wet and probably super stinky as well. So, but yeah, so that's kind of a little background on kappa in general. As for this collection, Specimens of Hawaiian Kapa, I first became aware of it just doing sort of routine research at the end of 2019. There are 95 copies of this collection altogether, and to date, this is only the third one that actually exists in Hawaii that we know of. When I first became aware of this collection, there are two copies that are on Oahu. The first one is at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in their Hamilton, the Hawaiian Collection there library, and then the other one is at the Hawaii State Library in Honolulu. And I was really excited to find out about this because I had no idea that this resource existed. It's one of those things you look up, library resources, and all you get is like a sentence, and it's like, oh, what is that? And so I ended up calling the woman, people at the university, or not at the university, but at the state library, and they were like, we didn't even know we had this. And I was like, oh, that's okay. Well, I'm going to come and take a look at it. And so it's good to know, on Oahu there are these two resources. Just like with this collection here, they're in-house only, and they're very similar to this collection in the sense that they have the same pieces of kappa in them, but again, they're different samples essentially. So this book was put together, this collection was put together by a man named Don Severson. He was an antiquarian. I don't personally know a whole lot about him, unfortunately. I've tried to do my research. One person that I was hoping to talk with a little bit about him and about this collection was Adrienne Kepler. She's a very well-known Kappa and Tapa researcher. Unfortunately, she just passed this past March. So I really missed an opportunity there, which is unfortunate. There are other people that are still alive who did do some work on this collection with Don Severson. I'm hoping to maybe reach out to them, as soon as possible, ideally. But he had an antique store in Oahu for many years. He passed away himself in 2010. But he put together this collection in 1977, I believe is the year. Altogether, there are 27 samples of Kappa in here, and most of these are from the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, the ABCFM, which many of you are probably familiar with. So these were early missionaries coming to Hawaii in the 1820s, and they were collecting all sorts of stuff. I mean, they were doing a lot of documentation and very problematic work, all things considered. That said, I'm also very grateful that they did collect a lot of these Kappa pieces. Unfortunately, that means that the deeper context is not known for these Kappa. There's only one piece in here that might have a little more information in terms of the fact that Queen Emma brought one of these samples to London when she went on her trip in 1865. This morning, my husband, who worked many, many years at Queen Emma Summer Palace, was like desperately looking at more information about it, and I was like, good luck. Like, she did a lot when she went on that trip, and unfortunately, I don't think her donation of a piece of Kappa she donated it to a museum. I don't think that there's a whole lot of context for that, and the fact that this piece of Kappa ended up in a private collector's possession anyway suggests that the museum didn't take it very seriously. They sold it in the end. Most of the pieces in here actually were originally in museums and got sold to private collectors, which is really sad, you know, and I mean, it's part of the history of the book. So, you know, it's something to just kind of keep in mind. But yeah, of the pieces in here, most of them, you know, don't have a deeper context. Most of them were probably made post-European contact, and there are reasons that we can kind of tell that I can sort of explore a little bit further. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of open it up as I'm talking. So there are two pieces to this, or two components, I should say, to the collection. The first is an actual book, which explains Kappa in pretty briefly, all things considered. But I do think that Don Severson did a very good job of finding his sources, which I can also talk about later. I have a few really good books on Kappa that I brought with me if anybody is interested in looking at those afterwards. But so the first folio here is the actual, this is his information. So he explains in the beginning pretty much what I just explained, which is where some of these pieces came from originally, a bit of the provenance for these pieces, and then some history on Kappa making as well. And he went all out. Like, this is a very attractive binding that he had done, very professional. I actually met somebody who knew, I think at the talk story I did in 2020, there was a woman that mentioned that she had a connection with the person who actually did the printing of this, which is really interesting. And again, something for me to kind of dig into a little bit further in the future, hopefully. But the way that he displays all the different samples in here is they're glued at the very top to the page, and there's provenance given. So again, like a little brief history, basically. The hard thing about this collection for me when I first discovered one of the copies in Oahu, the first one I went to go see was the one at UH Manoa. And it's hard to imagine that these samples in here, which are only a few inches by a few inches, came from much larger Kappa. I mean, these were like 7 by 7 feet. They were really big, really dramatic. You know, a lot of work went into them in terms of the creation and the designing and everything. And it was really hard for me initially to see these pieces cut into smaller fragments. And it's still really hard for me. But at the same time, you know, this was done in the 1970s. It was a little different of a time. And I feel that Don Severson was hoping, and he does mention this, he wanted these collections to be spread out. So what he did was he took all these Kappa samples, he cut them up into pieces to make 95 copies of this collection. The number of specimens in each collection is not always the same. The first several books, he had 33 samples, the next several 27, and so on and so forth, down to 10 in the last couple. His purpose in doing that was to have different price points for people to purchase the books if they couldn't buy the more expensive versions. But the 3 copies that live in Hawaii now, the 2 in Oahu and this one here, all 3 of these have 27 specimens altogether inside of them. So although they are taken from larger pieces, I'm really hoping, part of why I'm here today is to try to bring out that goal of his that he says was one of the purposes, is to spread that knowledge, right? So I don't want people to forget that this collection exists, and I want people to feel like they can come and see it. Just wear gloves is kind of the big thing. So this is one example of one of the pieces. So what he starts with is some information about the piece. And sometimes that's a little briefer than others. Like this one, he really has a whole bunch of information. The next one in here I see, it literally just says ABCFM, which means it was from the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, yellow with umber spotting, and then the size of the original Kappa. It differs depending on the sample. But inside of this folio is the actual specimen, and it's prefaced first with a photograph of the original larger piece. So not to get nitpicky, I wish he had done this in color. Unfortunately, he chose to do a little more artistic route, and so everything's kind of this like sepia red tone. I don't know what to call this, to be honest. But this is what all the pictures look like, is this kind of reddish image. I'm glad at least there's a larger picture taken, and I'm going to go ahead and lay that actually behind here so that I can show you folks what one of the samples looks like. So this is one of the samples of Kappa. And so it's glued at the top with a very thin strip of glue, something that Rowan, my kumu, and a few of my other friends, we would like to know what glue was used, because it's not bleeding through, which is really impressive. But again, there's just a lot of mystery with this collection overall. And there's a lot of mystery when it comes to the design work. In this case, we think, for example, that this design was probably made with a, I wish I had an example of one, but if anybody's familiar with the pandanus, the hala fruits, we think that maybe the back of a hala fruit might have been used as a stamp for this, because it's a very geometric pattern, but it's also not super precise. And generally, when it comes to design work on Kappa, this was done with ohe kapala. So this is an ohe kapala right here. These are bamboo stamps that are carved. I'm not very good at making these myself, so my example's not great. But these could get really, really intricate. And both with the ie kuku, the carved beater, and with the ohe kapala, after European arrival, because metal tools were suddenly an option, the design work on these things got really, really, really precise, super, super defined. Just very, very impressive overall. I'm not saying they weren't impressive already. They were. But the ability to carve with a metal tool allowed just finer details. So it's possible it might have been done with an ohe kapala. It just doesn't look like one to me personally. And you can see the coloration on this. This is the fun and the mystery. What dyes were used? Because these are probably all post-European produced kappa. These dyes could be natural, they could be artificial dyes as well. And it's known that when European textiles arrived, women started taking pieces of red fabric in particular and beating it into kappa to bleed out that red coloration into the kappa. There's other methods that were used as well. I'm not as familiar with those, so I'm not going to try to explain them. But just ingenuity, and like taking new materials and creating something familiar but completely different, it gives me chicken skin personally. And so the nice thing is, because he only glued the top part of these collections, it allows us to very gently lift up these pieces and see the watermarks that are left on them. So in this case, this is sort of a cross-hatching pattern, which could have been carved into the ie kuku, or it could have just been these grooves could have gone in one direction, and it could have been beaten in the other direction as well. And it's hard to see that, I know, probably. Like, people are welcome to come up if they want to take a closer look. There's nothing wrong with that. What amazes me is how thin these kappa are, too. I mean, it's extremely thin. Like, the first time I ever took a look at one of these books, I was with my friend Malia, and she and I are looking at it, and then we look at each other, and she's like, what are we doing wrong? Because, like, our kappa are so thick in comparison. And I was like, I don't think we're doing anything wrong. We're not masters, And these women were, and that's one thing I actually forgot to mention, is that Kappa by and large was made by women. By and large, or Mahu individuals. There was some Kappa that was only made by men, and these were some very specific types of Kappa used in very specific types of ceremonies. Again, I'm not going to speak on that too much because I don't have all of that memorized, but a lot of that is, you can explore that in some of the literature that I can mention in a little bit here. So, do we want to take a look at another one of these samples? Yes? Okay. Yeah. They're incredible. They really are. And they're all very different from each other, too. I'm actually going to try to find the one from Queen Emma because I try not to have favorites in life, but Queen Emma is just one of my favorite people, and this Kappa is, she obviously chose something very special for this donation that she made to the, I can't think of the name of the museum right now. It'll be in here. There it is. So, try to keep these all together so they don't get messed up. Okay, so this Kappa was given to the Saffron Walden Museum by the Queen. This was during her trip in 1965. So this would have been a really hard time for her. Her husband, Alexander Liho had passed at that point in time. Their son also had passed. And so this was, this trip had a number of different purposes, but I think one of them was for her to try to get her head out of things, And so this is the sample that she brought. It's got this really beautiful, and of course it's hard to tell just from, this one piece, but I can show you guys, I'll hold up the image, and these were sort of these diagonal, almost like a chevron design, so although they just look like diagonal lines here, the larger piece was, there's probably a proper term for the chevron's not quite right, but you can see how like these pieces, or these designs like went back and forth, kind of like shark teeth or something like that, And so it's something else. I wish we had all the books so we could put these pieces back together, frankly. But yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and hold that up again just because it's not just beautiful in terms of its design. This is one of those that is so detailed. It almost looks like it's barely holding together, but it's actually really tough. And that's another thing about Kappa. I think that people tend to think that it's, I'm sorry, just so you guys can see in the back. So I don't know if you guys can see how sheer that is. It's basically lace. For all intents and purposes, this is lace, And Kappa's a really tough material, I mean, it was used for, again, everything, but it was also used to keep people warm on Mauna Kea, like bird hunters up in the Pohakula region and stuff. So I know. It's really, really fine. And so this pattern, this kakao by this watermark here is, looks like pu'ili to me, which, like the instrument, it's this sort of back and forth pattern like that. I don't have one, unfortunately, on my EA cuckoo, so I wouldn't be able to show you folks. But yeah, so that's the amazing thing is that not only do you have the design work with dyes or with organic materials on the surface, but then you've got this whole other life that's happening in the watermark as well. There's just different layers to how it looks. It depends on the lighting. You could just imagine like women in the past wearing their pa'u, their skirts, and with the right movement, seeing different things. It's just an incredible vision that I have in my head, But yeah, so this is the piece that she donated to the Saffron Walden Museum, as it is called. And why they sold it, I don't know. Should they have? Probably not. But I suppose we can be grateful that we get to appreciate this piece as well, instead of having to travel to London to see it, right? So, and there is a piece of Kappa in here that I won't show today, but it's the very last one at the back of the book. It's a burial Kappa, and it was stolen out of a cave. And so that's where this collection is really heavy. There's a lot of energy in here. And I think the least we can do is just remember the people that made these pieces and know that there's deeper stories here that will never get fully shared. But to keep them alive by discussing them, by showing them with each other, I think is really important. I did digitize this collection as well. because of my concern that, again, like only so many people can come in and actually take a look at this. It's also really daunting, frankly. It's daunting for me. I mean, I have a background in anthropology. I've done stuff in museums before. I've worked as an archaeologist. I'm pretty good with fine detailed stuff. And I'm still like, oh my goodness, is it okay for me to touch any of this? Like, am I going to hurt it? So far, so good. But that said, having a digital copy is really nice because it means that there can be a little more exploration by more folks out there. So if anybody is interested in that digitized collection, feel free to let me know. I'm going to see if I can find a few more in here. Honestly, they're all really impressive in my opinion, but I do know that there's a few in here that have some really, really unique coloration on them. And, ooh, I wonder if this is the one. Yes, I love this one. So again, this is one of those American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions pieces that was collected. So here's an image of the original. Can't really get a very good idea of what that looked like. But here is the sample. And so this, very obviously, Ohe Kapala, used for those geometric patterns. So unlike the one that I showed you guys at the beginning that I think is probably more of like an organic design, this is definitely two different types of Ohe Kapala that would have been dipped into a black ink or a black paint and then pressed onto the finished piece of Kappa and giving that incredible design work. And then the coloration on this one, I would call it pink. It's referred to as red actually in the book. It's possible that it might have been more red once upon a time. And I do think that this color is probably not a natural plant-based dye. I'm pretty sure this is a good example of these women probably took, just fragments of red material, red fabric. Do love the photo of this one. You can really see the design work on it. It's this beautiful, like, I don't know if this is called a calico pattern. I'm honestly not certain, but it's got sort of this like flowery design all over it. And the piece itself is just so cool because I can tell that this is an oil-based ink that was used. You can see that it's actually kind of bleeding out a little bit. So I'm not sure if you guys can see that from afar, but around these patterns, there's a little like a hazy kind of brownishness, which suggests to me that they're probably oil-based. So once again, I'm kind of guessing that that reddish color might not be a natural material. It might be though. It might be. I'm not sure. The black, on the other hand, though, I feel is probably soot or charcoal, probably from kukui or some other burned material, some other oily burned plant material, which was very commonly used in these designs. And then this one also does, if I remember correctly, have a more distinctive watermark pattern on it. So you can see just how thin that material is. And so I get the feeling that the vast majority of the pieces in this collection were probably not used for clothing, probably not used for bedding. I do think most of these were made as artistic expression and as items to trade with, probably. And what's really unique about this pattern, actually, is that my friend, Uncle Wes in Oahu, he's a very well-known Kappa maker, and he also practices traditional Hawaiian massage. And he sent me a picture, actually, of a European textile with that exact design on it. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, here you can see that inspiration and just, again, that transfer of design and of knowledge. And it's just really neat because it means that, there is some, like, history that you can kind of dig into with that, Is this the one from Fiji? I don't think it is. No, it's not. But let's see if I can find. Feel free to let me know if I'm going over time or anything, by the way.
You are doing great.
Thanks. So this is another one that actually I'll just go ahead and show you guys because it's the same. I can tell it's the same type of dye used in the last one that I showed you guys. So again, just these really, really detailed Ohe Kapala, stamped images, and that orange and black. I would really like to know what that orange is. Again, like part of me says probably not natural dye, but I mean, Lisa, you and I have seen some pretty amazing colors come out of plants, so I'm not sure. And especially for it to be orange like that too. Who knows?
Must be like a lana that's like altered with something chemically.
You know,
I wonder.
it could be. It could be, honestly. I don't see why not. I mean,
Is that rusty color?
right. Well, I'm just thinking of how Rowan, adds the baking soda to her Olena and it makes orange, It's totally possible that this might be the same idea, but maybe with lime, like crushed burnt coral, which is a little more basic, I think, and it's a little stronger. And there is history, I think, of that being used on Kappa as well, at least to some extent. I did learn from Kaiulani de Silva, actually, in a dye class I took many years ago, that's one way to, change coloration is to, and I'd love to do that. I'd love to take, old coral and burn it in a kiln and use it in my artwork, but man, I would need a kiln first, and that's just a whole nother thing, but yes, let's see here. This one is the red one. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Sorry, just to continue that conversation about the coloring.
Mm-hmm.
Does oxidizing, like the paint, that oxidization, play a part in the coloration, and how it changes over time?
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely say so. Oxidization would be a big thing. So these colors will change over time. Just being exposed to the elements, even if they're not in direct sunlight, just getting that oxygen basically will change them. And of course, sun is another thing. I kind of doubt any of these pieces were in direct sunlight at any point in time, for a long period of time at least. But I'm really glad you asked that. And yes, I would say that oxidization, no matter what the material, is going to have an impact unless it's soil-based. That's the one time that usually, and I could be wrong about this, but usually you're not going to see much of a transformation in colors that are soil-based because they are inorganic materials and they're much more stable. But that's where, that's the crazy thing is we always think about like synthetic dyes. Maybe I shouldn't say we always think this, but I think it's pretty common that we're all used to synthetic dyes. I'm sure all of us right now are wearing clothing with synthetic dyes used in it. More saturated colors, they last longer than natural materials do. But they fade too. So everything is subject to change basically, and that's part of where, like, in my own Kappa practice, I really like using natural materials because it's just so exciting and it changes. And like, to me, that's part of the process is like, I'm not going to stay the same forever. Why should my artwork stay the same forever too, Like, it's just not going to. So here's another ABCFM piece. And so this one, you can actually see the cacao vai, the watermark, through the dye process, which is really interesting. And I don't think that was really obvious on the rest of those. So this is this design is called Upena Pupu, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a moment since I had to say these things out loud and not just in my own head. But it's like a fishnet pattern, right? So it's kind of this like back and forth diagonal diamonds. And then there's a little puka, which is the pupu inside. And so this one is one of those really fun ones. Oh, I'm going to pick you up from the other corner because you were actually quite fragile. Right? I just love it. It's so cool. I had so much fun trying to photograph these at my house. Not easy, honestly. I was just like, I got to be so careful and not like get my oils on it or anything either. But yeah, these are... And there's several in here actually that are this Upena Pupu pattern. One day I'd like to actually go through the collection and record each of the different cacao vai and the stamping patterns that are on these, just so that information is like easy for people to understand and read at some point. See, this is the yellow one. There's some colors in here that are crazy. And by the way, folks, go ahead and yell out any questions you guys might have or observations. Yes?
Do the patterns mean something?
They totally do, yes. So both the watermarks and then also the Ohe Kapala, there's totally stories behind these things. I don't know if I can dig into some of that too deeply because I'm not the most knowledgeable about it, but the names for these things usually are taken from other things that they represent, either in nature or, for example, like pu'ili, which I mentioned earlier. Pu'ili are the bamboo, right? Pu'ili, the bamboo instruments that are used in hula. And so that design is like this sort of diamond pattern that doesn't touch each other, though. They come in like this and then out like that, in like this, out like that. And it's like the pu'ili. putting them together and hitting them together. Another design is koeao, and koeao is a worm, and it's just this like back and forth, over and over and over again, interlocking with each other. So you can see that like wiggly, wormy movement in that design work, which I think is really cool. There's a few others as well. Nihomano, so like a shark tooth pattern, which is, you can kind of imagine it's like triangles and stuff like that. So yeah, so there's totally stories behind all these different shapes and designs. And actually, one of the best resources I found to talk a little bit about that is, oh gosh, why am I blanking on? Not Manuhe Ali'i. Who's the really amazing clothing designer? And they're a halal. Yes. So if you go on their website, So if you go on Manaola's website, they have a whole, I think the page that in question is like, our designs or something like that. And they really dig into it and how their design work is totally inspired by Ohe Kapala in particular. So I'm really grateful that they put all that information out there because it's actually been really, really helpful for me to learn more about this stuff. So let's see. I want to show you guys one of the ones that's just like a crazy color because there's some wild ones in here, honestly, where it's just like, wow, somebody just like made everybody in their entire like hometown like jealous with this coloration. I will show you folks this one. So this is the one that is not, again, kind of hard to tell just from the photo alone. This is the one that I want to say they think it's probably Fijian. It's probably not Hawaiian Kappa. Pretty sure it's Fijian is what I was reading. So originally, in the other copies, there was an inset with this piece explaining that. Unfortunately, this copy didn't come with that. But again, just beautiful. That red color, that like rusty red in the back, and then this kind of like, again, I can see like an oily sheen to the black, so suggesting probably a natural material that's been, cooked and applied. But what's really cool about this piece is, unlike the other pieces we've been seeing, so the design work doesn't go through. So it's just red on the other side. And again, that's because, if this is like sort of an oily material, it's probably not bleeding through quite as much. This is also a thicker piece. And it just, it doesn't look not Hawaiian to me per se, but there's some things about it that seem a little different from some of these other pieces. So I am grateful that Don Severson did go through and he kind of corrected that before he like sent these things out to whoever were purchasing them originally, because it didn't really. No, yeah, and that's another thing. So the watermarks, those kakawai, that's a pretty Hawaiian thing. I do think some parts of the Pacific had that, but again, like if you're beading something that has a grooved tool, you're gonna get some patterns. It's just that in Hawaii, those groove patterns got so much more detailed and so much more specific to Hawaii. And that's kind of why Hawaiian Kappa is, I would say, particularly famous. It makes me excited, but it also bothers me when I see people that, like, in a lot of old literature, there's statements of like, oh, Hawaiian Kappa was the best. Thank you so much for coming. Have a good one, yeah. Like statements of how like Hawaiian Kappa is the best Kappa. It's so much more refined or like detailed or evolved, and it's like, it's Hawaiian Kappa and it's amazing. We should also give credit to every other group of people that were making this material because it's just different. That's really the bottom line, is that all this, every piece of Kappa is unique as well. So I think that it's good to like, be proud of this history while also being like, oh my God, and it's so similar to this other cool stuff that's happening elsewhere, Aha, this is the one I wanted to find. All right, so this is, again, photo really doesn't show anything. But this piece is just, look at the color. Isn't that cool? I love that one. So this one, I can like say with 99% confidence, this is not natural material or natural dye. So this one I'm quite certain would have been, there would have been fabric taken and again beaten into it. In fact, I almost think I can see, you know what? I'm going to take a close look. And if anybody else wants to come up here and take a close look, maybe give me another opinion. Do you guys see fibers? Red fibers that are beaten into it? A little bit in a few areas. Yeah, and I never noticed that before. So that's where there's just always more to learn. And again, this is one of those that like, I don't know if you guys can see that watermark as well as I can, but do you see that from the backside? Yeah, the light just comes through it. So that's that upena pupu, almost like an eyeball, that watermark pattern. So, yeah, that's really exciting. I know. And what's interesting too is you guys can see how it's really dyed on the top, but not on the bottom. I don't know what to make of that. Normally dyes do go through. So whether there was a backside that was put together afterwards, I don't know, you know. But to me, I mean, it looks like it's all beaten together. Like you can still see the red is bleeding through in areas. So I think they only dyed the top piece, and then they took an undyed piece, beat them together. Yeah. So, yeah, that's really cool that we can actually see some of the fibers in that. I never noticed that before. That's where there's always more to learn with these pieces. And I have seen this before. I got to take a look at some of the kappa that they have at Hulihe'e Palace. Is that last year? Oh, time is such an illusion. But same thing there. You could actually see the fibers that were taken and put into the kappa and then beaten to get that coloration out. We should try that sometime. Get some scraps of clothing and just like beat it in, you know.
Do you know about how when these kappas were produced? I know that they made the book back. But
Yeah, I have a feeling that most of these kappa were probably made in the early 19th century, so the early 1800s. I do think that early 1800s. I don't think these pieces were probably made pre-European contact. There might be a few in here, but I think the vast majority of these kappa, at least the ones that are dyed, they are not natural dyes, or they're a combination of natural dyes and synthetic dyes, suggesting that they would have been made post-Cook's arrival, possibly even post-missionary arrival. It's a little hard to say. But because a lot of these pieces were collected in 1820, so the very first wave of missionaries, these kappa were probably already made prior to 1820. So I'm guessing somewhere between, realistically, 1780 and 1820 is probably when a lot of these kappa were made. And I mean, it's possible too that, you know, missionaries might have arrived and might have been like, hey, let's make some kappa right now for them. That's quite the process. I kind of doubt that was the case. I think a lot of these pieces were already made and were being traded and even given to these missionaries who, you know, they were kind of sampling from all sorts of different things for their research purposes and stuff. So.
I think that the colors were maintained for hundreds of years.
I know.
And that's amazing. And the fibers lasted so long.
Exactly. So that's where, like, the missionaries were very conscientious. Here's a cool one. So, you know, the blue wing that Rowan's been using? So here's another one that is I'm not even going to show you guys a photo of that one. It looks like he cut it before he even took a picture. But here's like a blue color. Yeah. And so blue wing is now is it used for laundry? Is that correct? Okay. Yes, which is so interesting when you think about it. And so blue wing is this like really intense blue, as the name suggests, dye, but it's used actually as like a cleaning product for clothing and stuff. And so Rowan, our teacher, our kumu, has actually been playing with blue wing because, as she pointed out, it's actually quite traditional. If you think about it, you know, these once upon a time it would have been a novel new thing for kappa, but now we can say, well, it was used 200 years ago. It's actually now a part of the tradition, right? Which is really cool to think about. And so it just gives us really cool blue color. I don't think this is uki uki or anything else that's like a natural blue. There are natural blues in Hawaii. Uki uki berries are really cool blue, but this does not look natural to me personally. And uki uki does tend to change over time. It gets more gray. So what that orange is on there, I have no idea. I almost feel like that might have just been a stain, probably. But that's where the missionaries that collected a lot of these pieces. This one actually is not. This was from the Waters Mahiole Martin collection. And I think he also was an antiquarian, just like Don Severson was. But going back to the ABCFM, when they collected these pieces, they went right back to, where were they from? Boston, I think. And they just went right back there, and they took these pieces and they gave them to a college, Amherst College. So I think these pieces were really just sitting, probably for a long time, stored away, and then they ended up selling them. You know, who knows why again. Maybe we can show one more piece. Let's see. This is just a white one. Oh, okay. I'll show you guys one more that's just, this is the one that I was like, what is happening? The color on this is like, and again, because there's no design work on it, the picture doesn't show anything really. It's just a piece, but like, I love this one. I mean, this is like Cheeto orange, you know? And what's interesting too is, to me, it looks different than those orange designs that I was showing you folks earlier, because that's where, with a closer look, I think those orange patterns might actually be a natural dye. This, on the other hand, I do not think is a natural dye. I really don't. But I do not know what it is. I don't think this is at all the same thing as the red that we were seeing. And I don't see any fiber in this one either. So yeah, it's just this, you know, if the camera can see that, just this crazy orange color that my camera could never pick up on it. Like, every time I tried to take a photo with my camera would be like, whoa, that's too saturated. We're going to dumb it down. I'm like, no, it really is that saturated. Like, please try to capture that. But this one also, I don't think has a watermark. Ah, I lied. It's hard to see it, but it's also an upena pupu pattern on this one, yeah. Very, very subtle. It's a little thicker than some of the other pieces. Still incredibly thin, though. And I do see, it almost looks like some stains on it. I mean, they are stains. I don't know what kind of stains they are, but yeah, interesting.
Does it look like possibly like a color on top of another color?
That is possible, yeah.
Red on top, like a, you know, like a mixture. I'm wondering because it looks like it doesn't look like the same color throughout the entire piece.
You're right, and I do see kind of like a dark in there as well. I'm not sure. I also think some of what I might be seeing personally, there's a little bit of dark. It's a little hard to see it, but sort of scattered throughout. I think some of this might be mold. Yeah, and which is unfortunate, but at least it didn't transform it too much. But yeah, I don't know what to make of this one, frankly. I'll have to send pictures of this one out to some people and be like, what do you guys think? And that's, again, this is where, like, personally, I mean, I'm currently a graduate student in the Tropical Conservation Biology program here, and I had to really pick and choose between applying for that or the Heritage Management program, because I was like, oh, if I do Heritage Management, I could make this my, like, grad project. Like, I could dig into this really deep, try to understand the dyes used, digitize it better than what I did before, you know, all sorts of cool stuff. And then I was like, well, but I'm personally very interested in environmental conservation. There's a lot of overlap here. I mean, this is literally ethnobotany. You know, this is, you know, plant-human relationships right here, which, as I mentioned earlier, you know, Kappa is not extinct. It's come back from the brink thanks to some really incredible women back in the 1960s and the 1970s. Pua Van Dorp is one of those women. Rowan Hufford's mother, Marie McDonald, is another one. Malia Solomon as well. And so these women, you know, right around the time, a little before, but, you know, same idea with the Hawaiian Renaissance in the 1970s, started becoming very interested in kappa making. And, you know, because it is fair to say at that point in time, it was a lost art. Nobody was known to be practicing kappa making. These women had to travel to other parts of the Pacific and learn techniques, you know, in Samoa or in Tonga, and then look at collections at Bishop Museum, for example, and try to kind of piece these things together and figure out how were Hawaiian kappa made, because there are a lot of differences with other parts of the Pacific where kappa or tapa or masi or, you know, all the different names for it are being produced still. And now there's, you know, a really big movement happening in Aotearoa, and there's a number of people out there that are making aute, which is their bark cloth as well. And that's really exciting because, again, it basically, you know, went completely underground with the arrival of European textiles. So, yeah, so these, you know, there's a constant evolution in these things. None of this is stagnant. The kappa that I make, for example, definitely serves a very different purpose than traditional kappa. My pieces are mostly wall pieces, you know, and when I design on them, because I'm very free form, I like to paint with my hands directly or with paintbrushes and things like that. I don't really use ohe kapala, so I'm not traditional by any means, you know, and that's where our kumu, Rowan, has made it clear, you know, it's important to keep the older practices alive and also bring in your own artistic style and have fun with it. You know, contemporary kappa can be whatever you want it to be. You know, I mean, there have been incredible stories like years ago, she and her mother made, helped a hula halau, I think it was halau o kekuhi, make pa'u out of kappa. And that was a big deal. You know, all these dancers got to wear kappa for Mary Monarch. And there's a really great, so because I'm kind of done showing you guys the book, I can kind of talk about some other resources in case people are interested. Is there anything else that went in here? No, I don't think so. So other resources. So I got into making kappa towards the middle end of 2017. I met my kumu, Rowan Hufford, at the Wili Wili Dry Forest Festival that happens in Waikoloa every year. And she was doing a kappa demo, and I was already very interested in learning about kappa, so I was really excited to meet her. But before I met her, I actually learned about her and her mother through a documentary that was done about the work that they did in general, but also specifically the pieces that they made for this hula halau. And that documentary is called Kahana Kappa, and you can find it at any of the public libraries. There might be a copy here as well, I'm not sure. But it's a really great documentary, totally worth the watch. And then there are a number of other books as well because, and unfortunately, this is the tricky thing, is a lot of these books are out of print now, but I have a few of them here with me. How do I tie you? Never learned how to tie my shoes, guys. Don't judge me. Just kidding. I know how to tie shoes. It's easier when it's on your foot and it's not a book. Haha, okay, that's good. So I'm going to just put you back in your box. And information.
The Avalon 27 pieces was the most you put in one.
Folio, actually the most was 33. Oops, I put this backwards. Yeah, so there's some copies out there that have 33. I have no idea where those are. I mean, that's the hard thing too, is that like, you know, we were discussing this earlier and I'll bring it up now. There is a copy actually of one of these books for sale online right now. It's $4,500. So if anybody who watches this recording later is like a wealthy patron and wants to help, you know, I mean, that's where, again, like, we only made this happen because of a whole bunch of really awesome people that, like, shared their money and shared their time and shared the information with each other. I'm so grateful that we were able to get this home, you know. Otherwise, it was gonna probably be bought by somebody in California, which is where it was sitting at the time, and frankly, probably not appreciated the way that we can appreciate it here, you know. But yeah, so some of them have 33, and then I think after 33, it went down to 27. So that's where we have, like, the 3 collections that are in Hawaii have, like, the second most number. The one that's for sale right now online has 15 samples, I think. So it's quite a bit less, and again, quite a bit of money, you know, all things considered. But who knows? Maybe I'll get rich one day. In environmental conservation, probably not. But I mean, we can hope, right? So some of the other books that I highly recommend for Kappa, I'll highlight this one first. This is Tapa and Polynesia. Awesome book. It's incredible. I haven't even finished it. You can see my bookmark is like not even halfway through, but it's so cool. This gentleman, I wish I could meet him. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Kujman, I think is how we say it. But just this absolute nerd who like went out and did all this research on Tapa all throughout Polynesia, and like, he's not insulting in it, thank goodness. I wish we didn't have to, like, you know, make people sound great just because they're not jerks. But, like, there are some jerks out there who write these books, and he's not one of them. He is just excited about barkcloth throughout the Pacific, and he does a great job. Unfortunately, this book is out of print. There are probably copies online for sale. There are copies at public libraries. I got mine for a very cheap price because they didn't know what they were selling, so I got very lucky there. But, yeah, thank goodness for eBay. I mean, seriously, like $35. I was like, you know. Another really good resource is David Molo's Hawaiian Antiquities. Just a great resource in general, but he does explain some really cool Kappa stuff in here. This one, I mean, again, Samuel Kamakaua, love Samuel Kamakaua. Not a kappa maker by any means, but he does a really good job explaining how some specific types of kappa are made. And then what's really cool is he lays out a bunch of different names for different types of kappa. I don't olelo. So for me, there's a lot of mystery in that. Even if I vehe all the different components, I'm like, I don't, what? Like, why is it called this? This is like there's a lot of projects that could happen with the information that he has in here because it's just enough information to like do some cool stuff, but not so much that you're like, oh yeah, I'm just following the guidelines like a recipe, you know? I actually did make a kappa that he explains in here as a research project, and it was so much fun, and I learned a lot, and it was just really exciting. And then finally, there's Kahana Kappa. This guy's super racist. I hate him. But he did do a really good job at compiling a lot of information on Kappa. I take his words with a grain of salt. This is William T. Brigham. He worked for many years at Bishop Museum. This book was printed in 1911. And yeah, really problematic. But it's also, technically it's out of print, and somehow this company got their hands on a way to print it and not get sued or something. So I got this for a really cheap price online, which is really nice. But he does have great photographs in here, and really dug in very deep with the Bishop Museum collection. So he explains like what the wood was used, or what type of wood was used for all the different beaters and all this other stuff. So, you know, it's something you have to read and just be ready to be like, oh, dude, really? But again, good resource if you can get through all the bad stuff. And then there's some recent books too. I don't have a copy yet, but there's a book called Material Approaches to Polynesian Barkcloth. I don't know if any of our libraries have a copy yet, but I plan on buying a copy myself. It's just that it's like, you know, $70 or something. So it's like, well, I'll get around to it. But yes, your question.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's somebody else.
Oh, okay. No, you're good. You're good. But yeah, so those are some resources. And again, there's a digitized copy of this that I created. I also digitized both the collections in Oahu as well. I'm not a professional digitizer. I literally just took photos with a decent little camera that I have. One day, maybe somebody can do something more with that. But if people are interested in those digital copies, I can send them their PDFs. And I really hope somebody one day will turn this into a research project of some sort. I would love to see somebody in the Heritage Management program or some other program, but ideally a student from Hawaii who maybe has some knowledge already coming in and just, you know, digging in deeper and like, you know, trying to understand the dyes that were used or whatever. In the meantime, I think that this is a great community resource, and together as a community, you know, we can put our heads together and try to figure out what's happening here, you know, why some of these patterns, what are the colors made out of, you know, when were these made perhaps. So I love the mystery. I wish that there was more information, but at the same time, the mystery is fun as well. So yeah, so that's that. Yeah. Mahalo, guys, for being here, and thank you guys so much for helping set up and recording as well. So, yeah, and if anybody wants to come take a look at these books, or I have a little Kappa sample, which